Hello. I decided to make a video so that you can see what I look like, but you also can't see me properly yet because I'm camera shy. Um, but I thought I would speak to the camera. Um, we had quite a stressful day today, so it's not helping my health right now. But I wanted to explain a bit more about the background from a mental health perspective, and how I reached the point where I'm at now. So basically, I was diagnosed here with complex PTSD, which stems from my childhood. um, I didn't realise, but my mum has narcissistic tendencies. So I grew up terrified and miserable, but I didn't know that was anything wrong. I thought that was because that was the way it was for everybody. So as a child, I had nothing to compare it to. I thought everybody was miserable and terrified. I only found out after several admissions to hospital, psychiatric hospital, in Aberdeen, Scotland, that I had psychotherapy assessments done, and they told me that the reason why I was still so terrified and afraid of my mum and felt like I could never do anything right was because she seemed to have narcissistic tendencies, possibly full-blown narcissistic personality disorder. So I grew up as the scapegoat. I know quite a lot about narcissism now. I've read about it. I grew up as the scapegoat, so I could never do anything right. My brother was the golden child. He could never do anything wrong. I don't blame him for that. It wasn't his fault. I don't blame my mum either for having the condition. To feel so empty that you have to abuse someone else, your own daughter, must be terrible. But it continued into adulthood as well, so hence my hospitalizations, the self-harm. I felt like a failure with everything. I was never good enough for my mum. I was constantly upsetting my mum. She'd always look down on me, talk down to me. It was emotional abuse, really, with physical abuse, psychological abuse. Narcissists tend to give out an image to other people that they're perfect. So my mum is one of these people, but behind closed doors it was very different. As a young child, I have strange memories of putting chilies in my mouth when I couldn't do my homework, and my mouth burning, but I didn't know why at the time, and it didn't help me with the homework. Being shut in the room, and my mum pinching me, standing on my feet, and telling me she didn't want me, and I wasn't like the other children. And I even remember my dad telling me, because my dad was also affected by my mum. My dad told me as a child that he wanted to go to Dignitas in Switzerland, and I didn't know what that was until I was older, and I found out that my dad actually felt like killing himself because of what my mum was putting him through. And I said, for me, it continued through adulthood. I used to try to go back every year, every Christmas, try to make things better, try to better myself. My mum would always want me to dress in the clothes she gave me. I was always too dirty for her. There was always something wrong with my hair. I had an ugly face. My forehead was too big. I didn't have enough makeup. My shoes weren't right. Nothing was right about me. None of my decisions were right. None of my opinions were allowed. I wasn't allowed to have a say in anything or speak for myself. I didn't have an identity. And And I had an experience with my brother a while ago when I went down to see his children, and I was already quite sick, suffering with whatever she'd done to me, and I was in my brother's house, and um, I just spilt a drop of soup on the side, and my brother went completely insane and hit his hand on the stairs. He broke his hand, so I was trying to give him first aid, and my mum was shouting and screaming at me that I'd just done this to my brother because I spilt the soup, tiny bit of soup on the work surface, and she was shouting at me to go away and not to help him, and then my brother had to go under anaesthetic the next day to have his bones repositioned, and so I was blamed for all of that as well. I'd caused everything, and I felt terrible. And as I said, I forced myself constantly to go back every Christmas, even though it made me sick and I'd end up in hospital afterwards, because I felt guilty for upsetting my mum. When I was a child, I was about 9. I tried to shut my hand in the door because I was so angry with myself and frustrated because I could never make my mum happy with me. She would never accept me, and I was always upsetting her, and I didn't want to be constantly upsetting my mum, so I was hating myself. From age about 9, I wanted to break my hand, I wanted to punish myself, I just wanted to be able to be a good daughter for my mum, and I wasn't able to do that, and I hated myself so much. And I still have trouble with the self-hatred. As an adult, I've been back home, I call it home, but it's not really. I've always been terrified of Cheltenham, which is where my parents have settled, from St Helena. But I went back one Christmas, and my mum got so angry with me because I was going to meet a friend and the weather wasn't very good. But I could stay with the friend, it wasn't a problem for me, and compared to Scotland, there was nothing wrong with the weather. And my mum got so angry with me that she came up to me and just punched me in the face and gave me a nosebleed. And then she told me that she wanted to hit me again, and so I told her if she wanted to hit me, if it made her feel better. And she did, and then she went in a rage and crying to bed, and I had to leave the house. I didn't know what to do. I contacted a CPN who I had at the time in Scotland, and she told me I could have gone to the police, but I didn't want to get my mum in trouble. She was running a play school, and I knew that those children were safe because I've been around when she's been there with the children, and she's very loving towards them. I know that she would never harm those children, and I didn't want her to lose her job. So I remember being confused as a child because I never understood why she gave them so much love, but I wasn't able to be accepted. She didn't want to hug me or anything, and I have to say I don't even love my mum, and I don't know how to love her, which makes me feel guilty again. I don't feel any connection with my mum at all, my biological mum. All I associate her with is terror, anxiety, fear, hurting me physically and mentally, and me being a terrible daughter and letting down the family. So much shame. She's totally ashamed of me for everything, and so I feel like it's my fault. And I've had people telling me I needed to go no contact with my mother because that's the way to deal with narcissistic abuse, and I tried. One of my friends wrote her a letter on my behalf, and it didn't go down very well. Said to contact me only through him, but it wasn't. My mother retaliated and said it was evil, and my brother said it was evil, and that it was all my problem. She didn't have a problem, but so the no contact didn't work. I was getting constant phone calls in the middle of the night, and now I'm terrified of the sound of a phone. I had to actually unplug my phone to stop the phone calls coming through, and I now just plug it in when I want to use it to call someone. In the end, I blocked her phone number as a way of reducing the contact, and she got very angry about that and changed her phone number and tried to call me one day, which sent me into a big shock as well. So now I don't have it plugged in at all, so nobody can phone me. I can only phone them. I do get the odd email still telling me how evil I am, telling me I'm causing so much damage and my mum's sick and that I don't care. She recently had a hip operation and she also hurt her shoulder, so she had to have treatment, and she was asking me why I wasn't down there to help her sort out the house because she's moving and I should be there looking after her, and that she's concerned that I don't care about her health. But I have given her lots of information and lots of helpful advice, and I did ask about it and advised her on the pain medication and things and the prognosis, and I just don't talk to her very much. But I have spoken to her about it, and I've tried to explain that I was coming to South Africa for therapy and with a friend. I couldn't even travel from, in the end, I got so bad I couldn't travel anywhere. So I wasn't going to make it 500 miles down to my mum and then make it to South Africa as well. And in the end, I just told her that the stuff in the cupboard that belongs to me. It's a lot of things from my christening, which I don't remember. A lot of things from when I was a child that I thought the mother would keep rather than the daughter. So in the end, I just told her, because I said that we could sell some of the things on eBay, that I would give her the money for them if she put them in the post. But in the end, she was angry with me because she wanted me to go down there and sort it out, and I couldn't face it. So I just told her to give it to charity, which she refused to do. She's just taking it to the dump. All of it is going to the dump, which is a little bit upsetting because there's a lot of photographs in there of people and animals that are now dead, and thinking of them just being dumped is upsetting. The rest of the stuff, I'm not materialistic, but there were certain things in there which she could have at least given to charity, so that other people less fortunate could have made use of, instead of it just being dumped. If she could go to the dump, she could have gone to a charity shop, in my opinion. So that was that. But I've really struggled with my mum since a couple of years ago when I went back to St Helena to see my nana. I hadn't been home for 10 years, and that's when I was raped repeatedly for nearly 12 hours in my nana's house. I ended up in the hospital because the police came, but I couldn't speak to them. There was blood everywhere, my clothes were torn up, and I had to go to the hospital. Had some awful tests done, and I then had to speak to the police. I did interviews with them for 4 hours. I had to draw pictures of the house and go through every detail of what happened. It was then I found out that my family didn't want to know me anymore on St Helena, and I'd been fine with my family on St Helena until then. I only had a problem with my mum. But nobody wanted to help me, and that was a big shock to me because I've got a big family, and I wasn't able to go back to the house where I was assaulted straight away, and they turned away from me. It was obvious that they were ashamed of me for speaking to the police and didn't, or blamed me for the rape, and didn't want to help me. They weren't comfortable around me anymore. So I ended up going to a refuge for women, which was set up by a group of South African women, because my people don't see a need for it. What I found out from ending up on the dark side of my culture was that although in South Africa there's a lot of rape here, people do know it's a crime, but on St Helena there's also rape. It's not as visible or as common, but it does happen to men, women and children, but it's not considered a crime generally. Through ignorance, it's considered a normal part of life, so anybody who talks out about it brings shame on the family. So I had that affected me just as much. I had my mum on the phone shouting and screaming at me a week after the assault, telling me I was causing so much damage, I was making the family sick, and I shouldn't have gone back in the first place. It was my fault for going back there. And I had to sit on the toilet while I was having this phone call with my mum. I didn't have any choice. My auntie kept calling her back, and it was like torture. And I couldn't work out why my mum. That's when I felt like I didn't think she could be my mum anymore. I didn't understand where that came from, and how you could treat someone like that. It was just a week after the assault. And then my nana died while I was there, so I didn't get to see her again. But I am glad that I went back to see her, because I hadn't seen her for 10 years. My nana didn't know about it, so I'm glad about that too, because she was 96, and it happened in her house. She was in the nursing home. She wouldn't have been able to cope with that. I had a meeting with the people in the refuge, and they were trying to sort out where I would go and stay, and my family were there, but they just said that I'd left the house with lots of bad memories for them now, because it's where they grew up, and now I've damaged it, and that they weren't my real family anymore. And I didn't really understand what was going on, why I was being rejected. I had a few friends left and a supported cousin, Candice, who's also rejected by the family. And then my mum basically turned as many people as possible against me on the island. There were lots of stories about me, and my mum was turning everybody against me. My auntie was trying to force me to speak to my mum all the time. When the ship broke down and the crack developed in the airway on Ascension, I then had to travel to South Africa without planning to. My auntie was trying to force me to meet my dad in Cape Town, so that I would go back with them to Cheltenham, and I would have to speak to them, I would have to stay with them. Had I done that, I know that I would have been dead by now. My friend Mary was in South Africa at the time, luckily, and I was able to travel to Johannesburg and fly back with her, but my family were not happy with that at all. They told me that I was putting on Mary, and that it wasn't fair on my dad because he wanted to help, and that I should be going to Cheltenham and not running away to Scotland with Mary, and that I should my parents should be able to deal with me properly in Cheltenham without me running away with my friend. But I ended up back in Scotland. I spoke to Rape Crisis Scotland, who were taking it on for me, but I found it really difficult to speak to them. A few other things happened. I had an appointment. I ended up in hospital again, just the local hospital, and I saw a psychiatrist that spoke to my family on the phone without my consent, and decided that I was the abusive one. And he came and he shouted into my face for half an hour without stopping, telling me I was a burden on society, a complete waste of time and resources, and that I needed to fix things with my family and stop abusing them. And he just shouted and shouted and shouted at me in the hospital bed. I wanted to die while I was in the room. I didn't understand what was going on. He told me that I had something called Munchausen's, and that I was making things up for attention. Attention-seeking disorder, and none of these things really existed. So I lost my identity after that completely, and I was unable to engage with Rape Crisis Scotland, even though Pamela was very helpful. Pamela believed me more than I believed myself. She was speaking to police on St. Helena. 8 other women had come forward, had been assaulted by the same man as me. That Christmas I then remembered that it had happened to me before when I was 9 or 10 on St. Helena, and I'd had forgotten that for over 20 years, but it came back to me and I wish it hadn't. And then all I remember is that it was an older man, but he may not be that old because I was only young at the time, and I didn't know what was happening to me. I just remember feeling in pain and uncomfortable and afraid. And people just laughed at me, and now I know it's because it was very commonplace on the island. I'll do another video about the background of why I've forgiven my people and why I think that isolation contributed to the mindset of the island and the ideology about this being normal and not being a crime came about through isolation. I've forgiven my family. I can't forget, but after the experience with the doctor, all of the health services were warned about me in Scotland. I couldn't get any help from anybody. Pamela from Rape Crisis was trying, and I was feeling worse and worse, but I thought I was beginning to fix myself, but then strange things started happening to me. I felt like I was being attacked again, and that I was back in my nana's house, and the man was there, and then he would disappear. And I would get angry with myself because I didn't trust my memories. I didn't know what was true, what wasn't true anymore. I didn't know who I was. It was a terrible feeling. I sat in the river to try to numb myself after speaking to that doctor because I didn't know who I was anymore. I did not want to be a burden on society, any society, and I've done lots of work here in South Africa with the children, and it made me feel like I was also a burden on the children here living in poverty, and all I wanted to do was kill myself. I didn't know why I had these memories if they weren't true. I didn't know why I felt like I'd caused all of the damage. I was evil, and that I was an attention seeker, and that my brain was making these things up for attention, and I didn't want to be that type of person. I would rather get rid of myself. But then more things started happening to me. I couldn't engage with Rape Crisis, as I said, because I didn't trust my memories enough to be able to speak openly about them to Pamela. So I carried on struggling, and then to my surprise, my case was going to go to court because of the other women that came forward, which is quite rare. And they told him it was going to go to court, but then they didn't keep him in custody. They let him out, and he went and hung himself. I got that message by email, which again I found very traumatic to deal with on top of everything else. I felt that like I'd let down all of the other women that had come forward as well, and also that I could never prove it to myself anymore because I would have gone to court no matter how hard it was. I couldn't prove that it happened because he killed himself. And I also find it disturbing. I find it really disturbing. I've had dreams of trying to get away from him, and then seeing him hanging and not being able to get away, and my blood being everywhere, and I wake up terrified, sometimes thinking I'm still in that house, and I really didn't know how to cope. After he hung himself, I ended up in hospital again, but nobody could help me. They just told me that people like me couldn't be helped, so I knew they thought that I was making it all up. And Pamela was still trying to support me. She knew that it was all true. But now I couldn't prove it to anybody, because he'd hung himself. And it was also me and the other women were then blamed for the second time. So I was blamed the first time for being raped and for reporting it. And then I was blamed again for his death. I'm not welcome home anymore on St. Helena. And I got worse and worse after that. I didn't want to speak to anybody. I started getting funny feelings, which started 2 years ago, but I didn't know that it was panic then. I thought it was just vertigo, or when I came to Soweto it was the high altitude. But now it got worse when I was back in Scotland, and I would get stuck on the kitchen floor all night when I panicked. My legs wouldn't work. So when you get the fight and flight, there's also a freeze response, and that's what my body was doing. And I would be stuck there all night long, and I would feel sick and dizzy and faint, and I wouldn't be able to stop shaking. My heart would be going really fast. I'd feel hot and cold, and then I would have really, really severe diarrhea. It would go on for days. I ended up getting so bad that I couldn't walk from my house anywhere. I couldn't go halfway down the road in a safe village without the feeling coming on in my legs, and I knew I had to get back because I'm very rural in Scotland. I had to get back to my house. I was completely housebound. I saw someone from social work every 6 weeks, and I wasn't able to make myself any better for it. I wasn't able to see any doctor or anything. My mother had been trying to get me an appointment for 2 years. And then Mary, my friend from Durban, came and she found me, and I was at the point where I was stuck in the bath. And I needed to be in the bath to be close enough to the toilet because of the diarrhea. And I couldn't make it from the bedroom anymore. I had to sleep in the bath. And she took me up to Aberdeen, and I saw an emergency psychiatrist up there. And that was when things started to change recently. I was absolutely terrified of seeing another psychiatrist. I didn't want to see anybody in the health service again. I was protecting myself from any more of that damage. I also didn't want to be a burden on the system, so I was terrified. But I saw Dr. Turner, and he told me that he disagreed with the diagnosis. And suddenly, all my memories were true, but I doubted about myself. He had my notes from when I stayed up in Aberdeenshire from Dr. Dunn that they told me on Arran never existed. He had them all there. And he told me that he changed my medication for me because I hadn't had it changed since before the rape. And he told me, he gave me sertraline, and I started taking that. I was terrified at first because I had this panic problem. Everything was terrifying me. I was terrified of having a panic attack, going on anything, coming off anything. But I persevered through it. I had a few panics when I was there. But it was beginning to help me, I think. But he told me I'd need to build up a relationship with the psychiatrist on Arran, who visits Arran, and see her regularly, and be referred to psychology, because it's very complicated. My whole situation is very complicated now. And there's a few more things. I lost my job when I ended up sick, and I worked for a fundamentalist Christian sect who didn't believe in mental health either. But I'll speak about that another time. But I saw him twice when I was in Aberdeen, and I travelled with a friend back to Arran. And the first appointment came around, but it was cancelled. But Pamela from Rape Crisis came across. There was a problem with the weather, and being an island, she doesn't come across in bad weather, so that it was cancelled for a month. But Dr. Turner spoke to me on the phone in the meantime, and told me that he would arrange another phone call appointment for me with him in between before the next month came around. And the next month came around, it was cancelled again. Yet again, Pamela came across, and she was told when she got to Lamlash Hospital that there were no boats. But Pamela had just got off a boat, so we knew full well what had happened. And she came to see me instead, and was going to try and get me an appointment on the mainland instead of on the island. But then it wasn't possible. Nothing was possible. Nothing could be arranged. The next month came around, it was cancelled again. The next month came around, it was cancelled again. Then I was getting worse and worse again. The sertraline was helping, but I felt like the panic was coming back. All of the feelings I was having were coming back again, and I couldn't get anywhere. A social work wouldn't help me. And then I had a very bad experience with the police. My family were being very abusive to me by email, and I was phoning the Rape Crisis helpline, and I told them about it, and they told me to inform the police because it was harassment, and it was making me more and more sick. So I tried to, then they came round and they just bullied me. I was stuck on the floor because two men came round. It's on my records that one officer has to be female, and I know there were female officers on the island. And I was stuck on the floor in a state from already the trauma from the emails from my family. Um, and they just kept shouting at me to stand up and stop shaking and speak louder, and there was nothing I could do. I tried to call a friend and they kicked the phone out of my hand. She could hear what was going on though. And then they told me if this storage really existed to show them, but I couldn't get to the computer because my legs were stuck. I was stuck on the floor. Um, and in the end, they just left. And I was left in a state again for the next few days. I didn't understand how this could happen to me. They just made me so much worse. Before I left the UK, I did put in a complaint because I had a problem with a police officer who I now know is called Scott Weir, and he's local. He lives in the village. And after I came back up to Scotland after I was assaulted, I had a problem with my self-harm, and victim support called them to check on me. And I remember this man coming to my house, and he was just shouting at the door and shouting at me, telling me I'm a waste of time. I'm up to my same tricks again. I'm a burden on the services, and that I'm just making all this up to spoil my neighbour's birthday, and that he just kept shouting at me, telling me I'm just a silly little girl, a silly little attention seeker who needs to get a life. And I was terrified of him because he was a man on his own shouting at me in my house, so I ran away from my house with no shoes and socks. I didn't believe he was a policeman at the time, and I ran into the field behind my house to get away from him. I was terrified. And then he caught me and threw me on the ground, was threatening to arrest me if I didn't go back to the house, and just kept calling me a silly little girl, and that self-harm was all attention-seeking behaviour, and that I was doing it to upset my neighbour, Kerry, because it was her 40th birthday. He told me I was doing it to spoil her birthday, and that I would never do anything to Kerry. She's so good to me. She collects my medication once a week for me because I hadn't managed to walk down the road anymore. I would never do anything to upset my neighbours. And then he kept telling me I should be arrested, and if I didn't stand up he was going to arrest me. I told him that my family think I'm the one who should be in prison anyway, rather than the man who assaulted me. And he said to me he would agree with my family. He thinks my family are very right. I should be in prison. And then I asked him what time it was. He said 10 o'clock, and I went back in and I phoned Rape Crisis Helpline. Told them there was a man in my house, and then I couldn't cope. They were shouting at me, and I put him on the phone to them. And then afterwards he just left. Told me to call the NHS if I had any problems. I've been back to the hospital since with really bad panic attack before I realised it was one, with my legs seizing up, and they just laughed at me and just said there's nothing they could do for me, and I had to be picked up. They didn't even tell me it was a panic attack or anything. They just kept nothing anybody could do for me. I decided to come back to South Africa as a last resort because I wanted to seek private help, or I wanted to die. And so when my friend Richard Stevens was flying, I worked everything out. I knew I couldn't travel alone, but I managed. I didn't even tell them I was going. In the health service, I didn't want any contact with anybody. But I did put that complaint in against the police before I left, because I know a few other people have had problems with the local police. And all I wanted was for them to treat people as human beings. And I don't think that's too much to ask. Just because of the police and they wear a uniform doesn't mean they're superior to anybody and above the law, in my opinion. And if they're doing it to me, they could be doing it to other people. All of them have stopped me from trusting myself enough and my memories to speak to Rape Crisis Scotland. I just doubted everything. I hated myself. I thought I killed somebody who was responsible for making them kill themselves, as well as dealing with what had happened to me. And I worked out that I could come here and I could see a private psychologist for much less than I could in the UK. I could pay for it because of the difference in currency. Just that, nothing else. Um, so that was the plan. Um, and I left the country on the 11th of December, landed on the 12th, and that's when I had another problem with the diarrhea and ended up in hospital here, which I've already explained, and ended up with the government services. So which I'm very grateful for, which I didn't think existed. But coming here is my last resort. If I don't manage to fix myself here, then I don't want to live anymore. I will get rid of myself. I know it's very difficult because I've tried several times, but I'm even thinking of going to Belgium, where I can get euthanasia. You know, it's so easy. You just drink something and go to sleep, and they understand that people are suffering, and it's not always something physical or terminal. So they give you a choice. But I'm going to try really hard here to see what help I can get here first, because as I said in a previous video, I've been offered a lot of help. I've been given new medication. I'm still having a few problems, but have been much better since having contact with people here. The biggest thing that had an impact on me was the psychiatrist here looking into my face and telling me to look into hers, and her saying, "You are never a burden on South Africa. You are never a burden on South Africa." That made a huge difference to my way of thinking, because I feel like a burden all the time. So at the moment, that's kind of some of the background. Now I'm trying to extend my visa so I can make use of what's been offered to me in this country, so that I can try to get better, because I didn't know it could physically affect me that much, as well as mentally. But it's a very difficult system to work with, the visa system here. I get 3 months free, and then I can extend it for another 3 months, which is what I'm trying to do before the 11th of January, which is approaching in 3 days. But the website is very difficult to use. I've been in person to speak to them. I've called the helpline. They said I need to register again. The website doesn't let me register my email. So I may have to, instead of paying 400 rands, I may have to pay a lot more and use a visa agency, because it's getting very desperate now. It's stressful, and it's adding to the stress I'm already dealing with as well. I did actually have a nice day today, as well as dealing with the stress with the visa. I caught up with some Burundian friends, a cousin of somebody who I know in Scotland, and her family, and it was really lovely to see them all. I'm going to try and work on all of this, and as once my visa is sorted, I'll be more relaxed and be able to focus more on the therapy I've been offered, and make the most of it, instead of going home and back to the situation where I want to die, and not being able to fix myself, hating myself, wanting to disappear. I have cut a few times since I've been here, but you can't really see it because it's too dark, and I don't want you to see it anyway, to be honest. But compared to before I came here, it's been a lot better. Everybody's been very supportive. So that's the situation at the moment. Today was stressful because of the visa process, but it will work out some way. I'm tired now, so I'm going to go, and hopefully I'll make a better video. You can see me better in sometime soon. Okay, so that's my plan. Bye for now.